Hello and welcome to the channel. It's me, Kris Brooks. I've put together a shortish documentary with the information that I have regarding Danny Beach's horrendous story at his farm, Pad Farm. I just wanted to kind of give you more insight, so I hope you enjoy it and let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, take care and have a good weekend. Bye for now.
Pensioners. Mr. and Mrs. Beach, the former owners of Pad Farm, were fined, imprisoned, and family evicted from their 32-acre farm for renting their caravans and storing commercial goods without the council's permission, only for the new owners to do the same and much, much more, but with the council's blessing. Plans have been submitted by the new owners for change of use of the Greenbelt land from an agricultural farm to a commercial yard, including a full-on industrial complex, multiple HGV movements and HGV parking, numerous multi-storey buildings, offices and metal fabrication workshops. The farm is situated at the end of a single-track road, Hurst Lane, Virginia Water, Egham, and next to dozens of residential homes. But Mr. Beach's historical planning applications were always refused by the council in the past. How is it the new cash-rich owners of Pad Farm will, more than likely, have their plans approved, while Mr. Beach's planning applications were always refused by Runnymede Borough Council? The penny drops. Mr. and Mrs. Beach were forced to give up their farm in Virginia Water, Egham, to pay the council compensation for alleged breaches in planning regulations. Runnymede Borough Council used the Proceeds of Crime Act to successfully prosecute Mr. and Mrs. Beach for receiving housing benefit payments for the rental of caravans to families, homeless families, which the council sent to Mr. and Mrs. Beach for emergency accommodation. For decades and with little recognition, Mr. and Mrs. Beach of Pad Farm, Surrey, had been putting roofs over the heads of Runnymede's less fortunate citizens at affordable rents paid for by Runnymede Borough Council. However, the High Court of Appeal in London ruled if accommodation, in this case caravans, doesn't have full planning permission. The practice of councils encouraging landlords to take rental payments and then prosecute the landlords for receiving the payments is acceptable, and the payments should be treated as illegal income recoverable by the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. But a caravan is a temporary structure, right? It has wheels, so why is planning permission required in the first place? Readers may be wondering, how is it a council can, with one hand, pay rent to a landlord and then with the other, prosecute the landlord for taking it? Well, the council say it's two different departments, with one not knowing what the other is doing. Mr. Beach therefore argued, "In that case, my wife is in effect a different department, as she never had anything to do with the running of the farm. Therefore, she should not be prosecuted." But the council and courts disagreed and sent both Mr. and Mrs. Beach to prison. The council also prosecuted Mr. and Mrs. Beach's son, and even their son's girlfriend, for residing at a property that allegedly breached planning regulations. WTF. Both of which faced lengthy jail time if they didn't pay the thousands of pounds demanded from them. Mr. Beach was prosecuted and fined for storing a small amount of commercial goods, such as containers, skips, and scaffolding, without the council's permission. Why would you need planning permission to have a skip on your own property? Look at it now. The new owners are taking the books and getting away with it. Mr. and Mrs. Beach were forced to pay an astonishing £1,400,000, plus interest at £400 per day, yes, per day, or sell their home, Pad Farm. The property was put up for sale because Mr. and Mrs. Beach would not sell Pad Farm to the council at a ridiculously low price. Runnymede Borough Council deliberately sabotaged all potential purchase inquiries and engineered the pensioners' imprisonment for non-payment. Mr. and Mrs. Beach were sentenced to a combined 13 years, 7 and 6 years, and sent to prison. While Mr. and Mrs. Beach were in prison, Runnymede Borough Council successfully applied for an enforcement receiver, specifically someone called Louise Britton. This scrupulous person, along with her heavies, went on to evict the Beach family and sold the property to her friends, the current new owners.
Stay there!
At a fraction of its value while charging Mr. and Mrs. Beach £666,000 for the privilege. When Mr. and Mrs. Beach owned Pad Farm, it was a typical small holding and residence, with a few caravans and outbuildings, buildings with existing permissions that provided an invaluable service to the local community. But look at Pad Farm now. New owners are continuing to concrete land at Pad Farm without permission and continue to ignore existing council-issued enforcement notices which prohibit the storage of commercial equipment. But Runnymede Borough Council are refusing to act against the new owners. Go figure.
Dear Sir, Runnymede Borough Council prosecuted me for breaches in planning regulations at Pad Farm. My wife and I were sent to prison for a considerable amount of time for what I consider minor violations in planning compared to what is currently happening at Pad Farm. See attached video. I understand the enforcement and stop notices served on me when I was the owner of Pad Farm are still in force today. I also understand the current owners of Pad Farm have applied for the council's approval to build an industrial complex at Pad Farm, which in effect is a part retrospective application given the current planning breaches. See attached video, which was taken and sent to me on the 3rd of March, 2024. Therefore, in the event planning for an industrial complex is refused, I expect the new owners to be prosecuted for ignoring the enforcement and stop notices, concreting without approval and other breaches in planning without delay. If the planning application, which is at appeal stage, is granted, I will be commencing legal action against the council for refusing my retrospective applications. Please acknowledge receipt and copy in Spelthorne Borough Council, Elizabeth A. Borthwick Cooper, Nicholas A. E. Imoon and James M.B. Parkin. Yours truly, D.C. Beach.
Dear Mr. Beach, thank you for your email to the planning inbox. The land is subject to 2 planning applications. 1 RU.230510 has a resolution to grant planning permission, which was granted by the Planning Committee late last year. Following the committee resolution, a planning permission will be granted once the S106 legal agreement has been completed. The permission, once granted, will mean that use of the main part of the site by PhD for their business operations will be lawful. Under the application and resolved permission, they will have to follow certain conditions, including removing all storage to the east of the site and removing that hard standing. The requirement to remove this area will come into effect once the permission has been formally issued. The main plans are attached. The most useful one is probably this plan. As there is a resolution to grant planning permission in place, the council would neither be able to reasonably enforce against the operations or prosecute, as the use of the land as shown above will soon be lawful, and so it will not pass the relevant tests for either course of action. Should of course anything change, for example they do not achieve permission because they do not complete their legal agreement, or should they not comply with the legal agreement, in particular, the requirement to remove hard standings, then this can be reviewed in the future. The resolution permission requires that operations be brought within the area shown in the plan above within a set period of time. Should they not comply with the planning permission, when issued, then of course the council will review and consider if formal action is appropriate. If after the permission is issued and the implementation period has passed you note departure from the permission, please do report it to the council and we will be happy to investigate. At that time you can report matters using this link, Planning Enforcement Runnymede Borough Council. As you say, there is another application at appeal which covers the wider site, Ref RU.211167, that is at appeal with the Planning Inspectorate, not the council, and as such I do not know the likely timeline for a decision on it. The council has no control over this decision. I hope that is helpful. Kind regards, Ashley. Ashley Smith, MRTPI Corporate Head of Planning, Economy and Built Environment. Runnymede Borough Council.
Will Runnymede Borough Council take action against the new cash-rich owners of the farm who are clearly breaching planning regulations and enforcement notices? Not a chance. The new owners are even concreting new roadways without a worry in the world. But if it were you or me or pensioners like Mr. and Mrs. Beach, the previous owners, you can bet your life that RBC would be down on us like a shot. Louise Britton. The receiver who evicted the Beach family and sold Pad Farm to her friends at less than half value gets an award. How can this be possible? Are you a farmer or landowner? Warning: what happened to this landowner could happen to you. Pad Farm sold at 1/3 of its market value. The receiver was, by order of the court, instructed to put Pad Farm on the open market. However, receiver Louise Britton accepted an offer from her friends of less than 30% of the property value. The new Pad Farm owners made an unconditional offer to purchase the property in 2018 from the receiver. The receiver, Louise Britton, freely admitted not actively marketing the property. Therefore, the new owners are by definition friends, or at least associates of the receiver. According to the receiver, Louise Britton, her friends made the highest offer to purchase Pad Farm, which was coincidentally 1/3 its market value. The receiver, Louise Britton, instructed Matt Brumpton from Agents SI to market the property. But shyster Matt Brumpton devalued the property instead and didn't even circulate the opportunity to investors. How else can one purchase 32 acres of prime real estate in the UK's most expensive area to buy land at less than 1/3 of its value? Just goes to show it's who you know and not what you know that matters. In addition to the manoeuvring and backroom deals, shyster Matt Brumpton from estate agents SIA received 120k plus, and, wait for it, the receiver, Louise Britton, received £666 from the sale of Pad Farm to her friends. Mr. and Ms. Beach were housing homeless families sent to them by Runnymede Borough Council. The council were paying Mr. and Miss Beach housing benefit payments for decades. However, the council decided the payments were illegal and Mr. and Mrs. Beach should be prosecuted under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. In which case, for the council to be funding illegal activity, the council are just as guilty, you would think. But apparently not. The state will be using this case as a precedent, allowing councils to entrap UK citizens into taking housing benefit payments on behalf of their tenants, then claim the payments back through the courts with a huge profit. Outrageous. What do you think? Is this some sort of temporary front or workaround for Runnymede Borough Council to carry out their master plan, which is to build hundreds of new homes on Pad Farm and Hurst Lane? What do you think?